Head of the political leader of the people of Tibet is based in India, and it's a privilege to have you with us uh, this evening, Excellency. I now invite Dr. Prakash Nanda, our secretary, to introduce you. Dr. Nanda.
His Excellency, was sworn in as to the Central Tibetan Administration and the Tibetan people at the official ceremony graced by His Holiness the Dalai Lama on 27th May 2021. I believe he was the second occupant of this exalted office. He grew up in Luksam, Sandupling Tibetan settlement in South India. After completing the higher education there from the Central Tibetan School, he graduated his bachelor degree in economics from Madras Christian College in Chennai from 1985 to 1988. So while pursuing his college studies, a series of major demonstrations erupted in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, against the unjust policies of the Chinese government. During this critical period, he joined the Tibetan freedom movement to initiate a solidarity campaign to highlight the sufferings of the Tibetan people and the repression inside Tibet. Over the years, after completing his college education, he served in various capacities and offered his wholehearted services to the Tibetan cause and the people through non-governmental organizations and by actively participating in various Tibetan political activities. In 1996, he was elected as a member of the Tibetan parliament in exile from Dormi constituency. As a member of the Tibetan parliament, he served as a representative of the entire Tibetan people and worked earnestly to resolve the issue of Tibet based on mutually beneficial middle way approach, advocating or as advocated by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and employing his knowledge of economics. His Excellency Sering also served in the Parliament Budget Estimate Committee many times. In 2001, he was re-elected as a member of the Tibetan Parliament, during which he took on the role of the Executive Director of Tibetan Parliamentary and Policy Research Center, a research agency based in New Delhi. His efforts as the Executive Director of what is known as TPPRC and the Indian political leaders led to the successful revival of the all-party Indian Parliamentary Forum for Tibet. In 2008, after his re-election to a third term, as a member of the Tibetan Parliament, His Excellency was elected as the Honorable Speaker of the 14th Tibetan Parliament in exile. In 2011, he was elected to a fourth term as a member of the 15th Tibetan Parliament in exile and was duly elected as the Speaker through a majority vote. In his 2 decades of service as a Tibetan parliamentarian, His Excellency has overseen various initiatives and activities to enhance the Tibetan freedom movement, ranging from fostering a grassroots foundation of democratic principles among the Tibetan people to the empowerment of Tibetan youth through workshops and seminars. He has worked diligently as a representative of the Tibetan people with an earnest effort to strengthen the Tibetan movement of Tibetan movements through diplomatic relations and advocacy on both national and international stages. From August 2016 to November 2017, His Excellency assumed the role and responsibility as the representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama at the Office of Tibet in Washington, D.C. He concentrated efforts to strengthen support for Tibet in the U.S. government and endeared many to Tibetan cause. During his stint as the representative, he also oversaw and participated in several forums and discussions on the issue of Tibet, including overseas Chinese intellectuals and democracy activists based in North America. So, Your Excellency, it is really a great honor for the FCC to host you here and to listen to you. And as everybody knows, that India never exactly had neighbor in China. Actually, our historically, civilizationally, our neighbor always was Tibet. So there is a big difference between Tibet being a neighbor and China being a neighbor. And towards Tibetan cause, any help that India provides towards the cause of Tibet, actually everybody now is realizing actually India is helping itself in that process. So it will be a delight and again, once again, a privilege to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. May I now invite Your Excellency, first Sering, to make his introductory remarks. After that, a question and answer session will follow. His Excellency Sering.
Thank you, Venkat Narayan ji and Dr. Prakash Nanda ji, Dr. Wael Awad ji, and all the members of the Foreign Correspondents Club, South Asia. The honor is all mine. In fact, I also want to thank Vijay Kranti, our old friend, for coordinating this with Venkat ji. Is possible. Now, where do we start? Sometimes I get stuck because most often we believe that since India has been our neighbor for centuries, Indians would know about Tibet. But unfortunately, sometimes we live under this illusion. But then the reality is that not that many Indians know about Tibet, and particularly in South India, where I was born, actually. So I think Dr. Prakash mentioned about my birth, Bailakupi in South India. That's why I keep saying I may look Tibetan, but I'm very much Indian. Because a person is defined by your thinking. And our thinking and our way of life is all influenced by India. So if we go back a little bit in history, in 7th century, we invented the Tibetan script. And that script was derived from Indian script, Brahmin Gupta script. So if I recite the Tibetan alphabets now, you will know how similar it is with Hindi. Ska kha kha nga, cha 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 nya, ta tha tha na, pa 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 ma, sa 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 wa, sha sa aya, ra la sha sa, ha a. So we have 30 consonants and only 4 vowels. Hindi has too many vowels. A a, I I, u u, e e, o, so many. But you can link the similarity. I'm saying this because many people fail to understand that the Tibetan script comes from India. Many people believe that the Tibetan script must have something to do with Chinese language. So Chinese is pictographic. Tibetan comes from the base of Sanskrit language. So that was the beginning of our association. And then in 8th century, when Buddhism spread to Tibet, we followed the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism, which focuses a lot on logic. So our religion also came from India, not from China. Today, Chinese government tries to convince others that Tibetan Buddhism also came from China. But unfortunately, history says that the king, Tizon Deodzhen, at that time was advised by the Indian master, Shanta Rakshita, that since you have already developed your own language, instead of me having to teach you Sanskrit, why don't you translate all the Sanskrit texts into Tibetan? And we followed that. Our emperor followed that to the letter. And we must have had the biggest transliteration house in the world in 8th century. We translated every available Sanskrit Buddhist text into Tibetan. So that is why we are repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom, which we are proud to say that we have been able to preserve and promote it. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama has played a very, very important role in getting the message of ancient Indian wisdom, which is still very relevant in this world, particularly at this time. We hope that the 21st century will be much more peaceful century, that people are more educated, people are becoming more broad-minded, but unfortunately, it has turned the other way around. We see conflicts everywhere and violent conflicts. So at this point of time, Buddha's message of ahimsa, of tolerance, of compassion, those are more relevant than ever before. So, tracing our cultural roots to India, if I take on some of the basic information, because sometimes we believe that you all know everything, but then we realize that not many people know about those things. So we call ourselves Tibet as the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. We say that in our prayers also. Heavenly abode, the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. Why land surrounded by snow mountain ranges? Because we have the whole of Himalayas in the south, the Karakoram in the west, Kunlun in the north, and a series of mountain ranges in the east. So Tibet is surrounded by snow mountain ranges. And we always believed that these natural barriers will save us over the centuries. And that is why we remained isolated for too long. Then Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world. Again, why roof of the world? Because of Tibet's altitude. So Tibet has an average altitude of more than 4,000 meters above sea level, or roughly 12 to 13,000 feet above sea level. When I was in Japan, I was asking the children, which is your highest mountain? And they said Mount Fuji. Now, a friend is here from Japan. And the altitude of Mount Fuji is about 3,700 meters. And I told the children, school children, that is like base camp in Tibet. So the highest mountain in Japan is base camp of Tibet. Then Asians call Tibet as the water tower of Asia. Again, why? Because the rivers that originate from Tibet flow into India and Pakistan, into Nepal, into India and Bangladesh, into Burma, into Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and into China. The two main rivers of China, Yangtze and Yalu, originate from Tibet. And Yalu is the cradle of Chinese civilization. Then, now environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole. Again, why? Because Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers. So the environmental importance of Tibet concerns not only the Tibetans, but the whole region. And the whole region consists of some of the most densely populated areas in the world. So that is why in future, if there is no sustainable agreement between countries who share these rivers, there could be serious issues about water security, food security. Today, we are political refugees, and sometimes I remind our friends, today we are political refugees, but tomorrow you might have so many environmental refugees. So it should be of direct concern to India as well. These are several descriptions of Tibet, and the size of Tibet is about 2.5 million square kilometers, which is about 10 times the size of UK. So Tibet is huge. I remember about 25 years ago, I met a Pakistani journalist and he thought that Tibet must be small like Bhutan. So Tibet is very big, but the population is only about 7 million right now. And for China, Tibet is only Tibet Autonomous Region, not the other regions where Tibetans contiguously live. So the areas where my father comes from, where His Holiness comes from, those are Qinghai region, Hamda region, and the Eastern Tibet also come from all Tibetan people who are inhabiting those regions for centuries. Now, historically, China's propaganda is so strong and so pervasive that now many people tend to believe what China says, that Tibet must have been part of China since time immemorial, or since antiquity, as China says. Now, when is antiquity? When is time immemorial? Earlier, they used to say 7th century, then 13th century, then 18th century. They couldn't prove any of those. So they went back to time immemorial, since antiquity. Now, Tibet has remained an independent state till occupation by the communist China. Between 7th to 9th century, Tibet was a huge empire, one of the three big empires in Central Asia, alongside China and Mongolia. Tibetan emperor invaded the capital of China, Xi'an at that time. And we went westward up to present-day Samarkand in Uzbekistan. But that was the extent of Tibetan Empire at one time. Then Tibet disintegrated for about 400 years after 9th century. Mongols became the rising power in Central Asia, led by Genghis Khan. And we established relations with the Mongols in 13th century, mid-13th century. Even before Mongols invaded China, or Kublai Khan invaded China. What Chinese call as the Yuan dynasty is only that period when the Mongols ruled China. It's from 1271 to 1368. And those days, Tibet was ruled by the Sagyapas. Then the Mongols were overthrown by the Ming Chinese, who are the real Chinese, the Han Chinese. And they ruled China from 1368 to 1644. We had three hegemonies during those times: the Pamodruba hegemony, the Rinpoche hegemony, and the Devadzangpa hegemony for about 300 years, till 1642. The fifth Dalai Lama took over the political and temporal responsibility of Tibet in 1642. That is 2 years before the Qings overthrew the Mings in China. And the Qings are Manchus, not Chinese. So I keep saying this: if you have watched Kung Fu movies, late contemporary histories, you will always find Chinese as the protagonists and the Manchus as the antagonists, Dakus. So today, China considers the Yuan and the Qing also as Chinese dynasty. And there were a lot of academic discourses within China as to who is a real Chinese. If China can claim that Mongolia is also Chinese or the Mongols are also Chinese, then perhaps they can claim half of the world because Genghis Khan conquered that area of the world. Yeah. So the fifth Dalai Lama took over the temporal and spiritual leadership 2 years before the Qing took over the Mings. And the fifth Dalai Lama was not militarily strong, but because of his spiritual influence over the Mongols, he gained a lot of respect from the Chinese emperor also. So we had equal relationship with the Chinese emperor at those days. Then 1895, the 13th Dalai Lama took the responsibility. By 1904, we had British India expedition into Tibet, the Young Husband expedition. The 13th Dalai Lama had to leave to Mongolia, eventually to China, and he came back from China in 1908, December. Took him about 1 year to reach Lhasa because on the way he would be visiting monasteries and preaching and all that. And by the time he reached Lhasa in December 2009, 3 months after that, Chinese military was already coming from Eastern Tibet. And they killed many Tibetans in Eastern Tibet, particularly Kham area. And then the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee to India from 1910 to 1912. He met with Lord Curzon and then stayed most of the time in Darjeeling, Kalimpong area before he returned back to Tibet in 1912. By that time, we had removed every single Chinese out of Tibet in 1912. There was not a single Chinese unless a Chinese had married into a Tibetan family. And you can see the descendants of those families now living in Calcutta, in Nepal, and some earlier they used to be more in Kalimpong, Darjeeling area. So why, again, the question is why they are in India, not the other side? Because the Tibetans decided not to send them from the east because Tibetans thought that they will come back with reinforcement. So they decided to send them back from India. And many of them didn't return back to China. So they are here. And then we signed the 1914 Shimla Agreement, which defines the McMahon Line. That was signed by independent Tibet with British Indian government. China did not ratify it, but so be it. But India signed, Tibet and British India signed as independent sovereign states to decide on the boundary issue. And from that time to Chinese occupation of Tibet in Eastern Tibet, Chamdo, in October 1950, Tibet was an independent state. There was no questions about it. Then Chinese came and invaded Chamdo in October 1950, and then they forced us to sign the 17-point agreement in 1951. Now, when I reach out to the international community, we tell the international community that if you keep repeating the statement that Tibet is part of People's Republic of China, you are going against international law. Because international law says that any agreement that is preceded by use of force is null and void. Now, if international law has to be applied, it has to be applied to everybody. Tibet cannot be an exception. Then we also tell governments that on one hand, you keep repeating the statement at the behest of the Chinese government that Tibet is part of PRC. But on the other hand, you keep repeating the statement that we support negotiation between the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. We tell them these two don't go together because China rules Tibet with an iron hand and they are trying to seek legitimacy from the international community. We have lived on that plateau for centuries, hoping that national boundaries will protect us. And even on those days, everybody else around us has been deciding for us in the great game. without our knowledge, they have been signing treaties. Now, when we are in exile, also the whole international community is deciding for us. So my question is, how many people have read Tibetan history to be able to take such a decision? The status of a nation or people does not depend on the whims and fancies of governments. It has to be based on historical facts. And then we ask this question: do you have any other cases in this world where one country invades another and tell the rest of the world to say this is part of us? I don't get to hear it. Even within China, do you hear the Chinese government asking other nations to say that Mongolia is part of us, or Manchuria is part of us, or East Turkestan is part of us? Why only Tibet? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy to rule over Tibet. And if there is anybody who can give that legitimacy, it can only be His Holiness the Dalai Lama or the Tibetan people. And that too, after reaching a resolution on the Sino-Tibet conflict. So historically, that is the fact. But then His Holiness has always been a very, very broad-minded person. He has also taken inspiration from the European Union, the concept of European Union, thinking about common interests rather than individual interests. And then Tibet being a landlocked country, we'll have to depend on our neighboring countries for our sustenance also. So on all those thinkings, based on those thinkings, His Holiness suggested the middle way approach. The thinking began in the early 70s. You can imagine early 70s was at the throes of cultural revolution that was happening in the whole of China, where everything old was being destroyed, and particularly more so inside Tibet. So there was the threat to the very survival of the Tibetan identity, which is an extension of Indian culture. So that is why His Holiness decided to make a softer approach to resolve this and came up with this middle way approach. And after the death of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping took over. Deng Xiaoping said, we can discuss about anything else other than independence. So we sent several fact-finding delegations into Tibet in the 80s. In 84 and 86, we sent 2 exploratory teams to explore negotiations. Nothing came out of that. But in 87, the first concrete proposal from His Holiness was the 5-point peace proposal to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict, and an explanation on the 5th point, which is negotiation, in the European Parliament in Strasbourg in 1988. There was a possibility for dialogue in 89, which dissipated very soon. Then His Holiness also withdrew all the conditions that he had proposed. And then we went through a referendum where majority of the Tibetans said that we will comply or agree with whatever His Holiness decides based on the evolving international scenario, status of the situation inside China and in Tibet. So in Parliament, the Tibetan Parliament in exile unanimously adopted that resolution, and His Holiness reiterated his commitment to the middle way approach. So middle way, of course, can be defined in so many ways. Of course, everybody knows that it's a Buddhist concept, avoiding extreme polarities. So in this case, we are talking about the polarities of Tibet as an independent state before Chinese occupation and the present status of Tibet under Chinese occupation. And the main aim of that is to preserve and protect Tibetan identity. The right for the Tibetan people to use their language, to practice their religion, to live their way of life, and also contribute in preservation of Tibet's fragile economy. So that is where we stand. Despite our strategy to talk about the independence of Tibet, which is a fact, because now this It's not the Tibetan saying it. It's Westerner and a Chinese professor talking about this. One Westerner had written a book called Tibet Brief 2020, and he worked with more than 70, 80 scholars over 7, 8 years in Asia. Unfortunately, the whole world looks at Chinese sources for Asian history. So he met with many historians of the region, and he concludes that whether it's Tibet-Mongol relationship, Tibet-Ming relationship, Tibet-Qing relationship, or as per international law today, Tibet has never been considered part of China. And there is a Chinese professor called Professor Lau Han-tin. He took a completely different approach, and he studied only imperial Chinese historical records. And he proves beyond doubt that imperial China, if you can consider the Yuan and Qing also as Chinese, they have never considered Tibet as part of China. So despite those facts, we are committed to middle way approach to find a solution that is mutually beneficial, mutually agreeable, long-lasting. And we believe that if there is a solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, there will be more peace and stability in the region. Because alongside resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict, then the boundary issue between India and Tibet also need to be resolved. So since we are all in the presence of media today, I would also like to underline this fact that India has not changed the Indo-Tibetan Border Force or Indo-Tibetan Border Police. It still remains Indo-Tibetan, not Sino-Indo-India border. So that underlines India's thinking, even though India is not vociferous about its position. So thank you. With this brief introduction, I'll be happy to take any questions that comes up.
Thank you, Excellency. I want to begin by asking a question myself. His Holiness has been saying, at least for the last half century, that he does not want Tibet to be independent of China, but he wants autonomy in the sense the language of the Tibetans, the culture of Tibetans should be preserved. There have been several delegations from His Holiness to China. What is the current status? Are there any negotiations going on between the government in exile or His Holiness with China at any level, formally or informally? And what is your take? Do you still believe what His Holiness says, that he wants to continue to be a part of China, but we would like autonomy and we want to preserve our culture, civilization and language? What is the status now?
Sorry, the expression His Holiness does not want independence, that is something that we have to be a little bit careful about, because His Holiness has been fighting for independence from 1959 to 73. And that has been the stated position of the Tibetan government in exile. Only from 73 onwards, His Holiness started thinking about the middle way, because our culture, our people, our monasteries, everything was being destroyed in Tibet those days. 1973, 66 cultural revolution started and ended in 76. And that was at the throes of cultural revolution. So it's not as if His Holiness doesn't want independence, but His Holiness has always been a very pragmatic and practical person. You can imagine no country supported independence of Tibet, including India, when we came into exile. When His Holiness reached Mussoorie, at the first press conference, he said that wherever me and my cabinet is, there is the government of Tibet. And a few days after that, there was a representation from the Indian government that we did not recognize exile government. So since then, His Holiness did not try to seek recognition from any other country. If there is no support from government of India, doesn't make sense. Who else will come and support us? So also because of those reasons, then of course there are talks about, China asking every government to say that Tibet is part of PRC. And then there is also this misconception about one China policy being applied to Tibet as well. Because one China has to do more with Taiwan, not with Tibet. So we still remain committed to the middle way. As per the status, I already talked about 84, 86, the exploratory teams. 89, there was a possibility that also dissipated. Then 2002 to 2010, there was a resumption of dialogue or beginning of a dialogue for about 8 years, just because China was holding its opening out party, the Olympics, and just soon after the Olympics, this also dissipated. So you can imagine the sincerity of the commitment of the Chinese government in resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict. Now, as of now, I'm not in a position to speak about exactly what is going on, but we are ready to engage with the Chinese government. And we have to engage because we have to function on two realities. One, if there has to be a peaceful resolution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, it cannot be achieved without talking with the Chinese government, whoever is there at the helm, at whatever time. And the second reality is, till such a time that there is a resolution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, we will be reaching out to the international community. That is our job. And China should not take offense because of that. We will have to keep doing what we need to do. So in that sense, if there is a positive gesture, if there is a commitment from the Chinese government, we are ready to reach out, but that we cannot be taken for a ride again. We have been taken for a ride for too long. So we are being very careful with every approach that we take, every step we take. So we are being very, very careful in our approach. So, but unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'm not able to tell you exactly what is going on now.
Yes. Please wait for the microphone, identify yourself and ask the question. Thank you.
I'm Indi Chandas. I work for this NK News India. I've been visiting Tibet House for the last 25 years. And the thing is, His Holiness keeps saying I'm 87 years young. It doesn't seem that within his lifetime this conflict is going to be solved. What if the solution after Dalai Lama? Could you say something about it? How the situation, it will turn, will it remain the same or it will turn different track?
Maybe, short one. Okay.
Manu Papi.
So this, am I audible? So this is Manu Papi from the Economic Times. So this question is on your view of the current situation. As you know, the India-Tibet border has been an area of concern and conflict. Your comments on two things. So one, we've heard the Chinese are raising new military units in Tibet, which is comprised of local forces. Your view on support within Tibet for such a initiative, and secondly, sir, we've been seeing the creation of a lot of new villages on the border, especially around Arunachal Pradesh. And these villages are apparently populated by the Han Chinese and not the typical population. Can you throw some more light on that? How do you see these kind of developments on the border with India?
Hello. My name is Tenzin Damdul. I'm a Tibetan refugee born in India. So firstly, I would like to thank the FCC for hosting our eminent Sikyong. So very grateful for that. So my question is, recently on Monday, the 16 Kashag released a vision paper called Securing Tibet's Future. So what can New Delhi work on it? Is there something that the people in New Delhi can work on this paper when it comes to resolving the Tibet-China conflict?
Maybe we can do three at a time. We'll do three at a time, okay? already got three. Yeah, we'll do three at a time. Yeah, the first question was whether the Sino-Tibet conflict would resolve during the lifetime of this Dalai Lama. I always remain very positive, and His Holiness has been assuring us that he will live for another 2 decades or more, or he will live up to 113 years of age. So as a follower of His Holiness, we believe in what His Holiness says. But I also remind our people that the life of His Holiness also depends on the relationship between the teacher and the disciples also. So we have to be mindful of what His Holiness says and how we can achieve what His Holiness says. So I also jokingly tell our Chinese friends also, let us see whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama outlives the Communist Party or the Communist Party outlives the Dalai Lama. That only time can tell. But I also have the liberty to say that. So we believe that His Holiness is key to resolving the Sino-Tibet conflict. If we are able to reach an agreement now, His Holiness is there to convince the Tibetan people that this is the best approach. In the absence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it will be very difficult to convince the Tibetans inside Tibet. And the reason for the Tibetans being so non-violent inside Tibet is also because of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He has always said that if you take up violence, I will not be responsible for the Tibetan movement. So that always puts a restraint on Tibetan activism, or in that sense, taking up violence. So no Tibetan takes. 157 Tibetans have self-immolated so far, hoping against hope that the Chinese government will pay some attention to their plight, or hoping against hope that the international community will come to their rescue. Unfortunately, it has not yielded the result that it should have. But I believe that their sacrifices will not go in vain. So we believe, we really hope that common sense will prevail in the minds or the brains of the Chinese leadership and see that this is resolved during the lifetime of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I'm sure there'll be more questions about His Holiness reincarnations also. But my answer to, and my message to the Chinese government is, whenever that time comes to look for reincarnation, if the Chinese government looks for one and we look for one, if till such a time that there is no freedom in Tibet, His Holiness has said that I will not be born in a country where there is no freedom. He'll be born in a free world. So we really hope that better sense come into Chinese leadership's mind. And then the current situation, it's very unfortunate. I have repeated that this statement several times, that we were signatory to the 1914 Shimla Agreement, and we are bound by that. We were a stakeholder in that, and we are bound by that. And we have always played the role of a buffer between the two most populous nations in the world. Now, if China grants genuine autonomy for the Tibetans, then we can be the bridge of better relations between China and India, the two most populous and two major economies of the world. So it's very unfortunate that China engages in unprovoked belligerence on the Indian border. I have never been to Tibet, but to fulfill my emotional needs, I go to the border areas. I was in Ladakh, I was in Tawang, I was in Lachen Lachung, and I managed to see Tibet through the barbed wires. That is how I fill my emotional needs. But then, in Ladakh, nobody lives on those mountains. Nothing grows in those mountains. So why is China making so much noise in those regions? So I get this feeling that China is very, very insecure today. Of course, everybody believes China is very strong militarily, economically, politically, but China has no moral power. That is what they lack. Nobody trusts them. Under Xi Jinping, there was this practice, but it's more reinforced during his period that not more than 3 Politburo members can meet together without the president's permission, which means that they are afraid of internal coup. Under Xi Jinping, he has made sure that all the generals are transferred every single year so that generals don't build better relations with the cadres. That also rules out military coup. China is the only country who spends more money on internal security than external security. That itself manifests a deep distrust between the rulers and the ruled. So if China has to really become a responsible power, they have to win trust of their own people, including the Han Chinese and the nationalities, various nationalities, then build better relations with its neighbors. They talk about harmonious relationship, but who has problem with whom? Every single country around China has problem with China. And then why do China keep all these spotlights burning, whether it's Ladakh or Taiwan on the Indian side of the border, or with South China Sea, aggressive postures there, saber rattling in Taiwan with Japan. China has problem with everybody. So if they really want to build better relations, they better restore their good relations with its neighbors. Then they have to build better relations with the whole international community. So I see a lot of insecurity. How much ever I think about Chinese strategy, then if it comes to the sustenance or the survival of the Communist Party, then they will surely, definitely attack one of these areas to make sure that nationalism is evoked and communism does not fall. Then the militarization in Tibet, of course, now so many more airports are coming up, railway lines are being linked. It has already been linked from Kormo to Lhasa to Shigatse. They plan to link it to Kathmandu, extended east up to Nyingchi in Kongpo, which is one of the most vulnerable areas for India that can be very close to the chicken's neck. And Tibetans being recruited, that they have been doing it for many years. It's nothing new. But then again, my question is how much can the Chinese military trust Tibetan army inside Tibet if you give them all the weapons and let them fight on the border? How much can Chinese government trust the Tibetans? Because we have traditional relationship with Tibet. For the Tibetans, India is the land of the Buddha. It's the land of our guru, our teacher. We always do not think about any harm coming to India. And that is the emotional bonding that Tibetans have with India. So you have Tibetan army also in the Indian side and Tibetan army also on the Chinese side. But I don't think Chinese government will have enough courage to trust the Tibetans on their own. In Arunachal Pradesh, I didn't get the question very right, but on the the villages, that is part of China's strategy because for Chinese government to secure the nation, what they say is they have to secure the frontiers. So Tibet is a frontier, and they are trying to secure all these by building more and more villages on all the border areas. That also makes it a bargaining chip for them to claim the territory. So from the Indian side also now, of course, a lot of infrastructure coming up on all sides, but there need to be more people on the border areas because those land belong to us in India. So if it belongs to us, there should be people living on those areas also. That is why I think tourism and all those needs to be promoted in the border areas for India to secure its own border. It's not just enough to have military on the border. You need people to live on the land that you own. So that is important. And then this question about vision paper. This vision paper was more to do with what we intend to do as Central Tibetan administration, looking into the future. So in this paper, of course, we are preparing ourselves, as every community has the saying, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So we are hoping for the best, that by talking with the Chinese government, there will be some resolution. And preparing for the worst, we are ready to fight for the next 50 years. So that is why we have to secure our future. Even though we are a dispersing community, we are now applying all our mind how to turn every challenge into an opportunity. And that is what the vision paper talks about. But it does not outline what we are expecting from Delhi or from people here. So I think now there is a lot more awareness about Tibet in India. And as I was traveling within India, also now more and more intellectuals, professors, media people, army people, doctors, they are now coming and joining the movement because there is more awareness. And definitely, I think we'll have to build on the momentum that has already been displayed.
Vijay?
Hello, my name is Vijay Kranti. My question is that of late we have been hearing many news about the colonial type of residential school being done by the Communist Party of China in Tibet. And in many news we discover that the total number of children who have been forcibly admitted there is 1 million or above. So how is it going to affect Tibet's position?
Yeah, there are many. Let's take three at a time.
Your Excellency, I'm Ayush Garg. I'm from Yan Media. So we have seen that there has been a lot of resistance within the Indian government to engage with the CTA at the highest levels. So you never see a high level, meeting between His Holiness and the Indian highest functionaries. So as Sikong of the Tibetan people and the political leader, is there any strategy that you have formulated to change this sort of, let us say, approach of the Indian government itself towards Tibet? And second, you talked about reaching out to the international community and promoting the Tibetan cause. So how receptive have countries been till date regarding the Tibetan cause? Are you getting any traction? Is there some sort of positive environment that you're seeing, or is it business as usual?
Yeah, Your Excellency, my question is about political support from India. When His Holiness came to India, there's a lot of civil society was behind him, supporting your people, and many politicians in Parliament used to raise Tibetan issues very often. I can mention Joe Fernandez in many of these issues coming in forward. Do you think there is lack of interest among the MPs, members of Parliament, and the political parties about Tibet these days?
Okay. The colonial style boarding school, as people term it, of course, I think the nature of these kind of schools varies from countries to countries. So you had a lot of issues in Canada about the residential schools, talk about how the Americans treated their native people, the Australians with their Aborigines, New Zealanders with the Maoris, Scandinavians with the Sami people. So all those kind of things are there. But what China is doing inside Tibet, at one time, I really used to fear huge demographic aggression into Tibet. Of course, there is demographic aggression into Tibet, but not at the scale that we feared at one time. So now what China is trying to do is, instead of sending too many people into Tibet, because you have to incentivize all the Chinese people who come into Tibet. So instead of that, they are turning every Tibetan into a Chinese. So you're talking about more than 1 million Tibetan children being put in boarding schools, where there is a facade of preservation of Tibetan culture by giving them Tibetan dress and giving them Tibetan food and all that, but there is only 4 Tibetan classes a week. Only 4 Tibetan classes a week. Now, small children, Vijayji talked about the 1 million plus, that is between 6 to 18 years of age. But between 3 to 6 in the Montessori also, we found there are more than 150,000 children now. Over the last few years, those number of schools have also come up. So we are not against providing education to the Tibetan children, but we are against Tibetans being turned into Chinese. Because in these schools, you are taught how to respect the Communist Party, how to abide by the rules of the Communist Party. They don't allow you to study Tibetan as it should be. So there is no scope for Tibetan to get a job, even if they study Tibetan inside Tibet. So that marginalizes us in all kinds of opportunities, including government jobs. And Indian government, CTA, now I don't want to be spilling out all the beans here, but I want to assure you that we have a very transparent relationship with the government of India at different levels with different departments. So we have received, from the time we came into exile, we have received so much love and so much support from the government of India and from the people of India that we are here because of the government of India. So I don't think we need to go beyond that. But as I was mentioning earlier also, of course, we will reach out to the international community, but we also know our limit. We know that no nation will forsake their interests for the interests of Tibet. So we keep our expectations also very pragmatic. We don't want to have over expectations and then have a lot of disappointment. This is a Buddhist way of understanding the situation. So there is no strategy to change unless the bosses of Indian government decide otherwise. I always tell the Indian government, I'm in no position to advise the Indian government or to tell the Indian government what to do. But we keep doing what we need to do, and Indian government provides us with the necessary support that they think we deserve or we should have. And then in the international community, of course, now, as you all know, we have the best political support from the US government, because US is the only one who has a law on Tibet called the Tibet Policy Act of 2002, which was amended again in 2020, now called Tibet Policy Support and Policy Act, that also incorporated in the latest amendment about the reincarnation of His Holiness, and the right to choose that reincarnation lies only with His Holiness. And of course, we travel around the world. We reach out to governments as much as possible. In Europe, we are seeing a perceptual change. But then again, how that will reflect on policies and programs on the ground is something to watch out for, because Europe is a very complicated system. You have 27 different countries. If you need consensus of all the countries, then you need only Hungary to nuke it. So, and you saw how Macron went to China and reacted. Now, German foreign minister is also in China to see how she can damage control some of the statements that were already made. And Europe are waking up to the reality. In the last 1.5, 2 years, there have been tremendous change in how they perceive China. And everybody recognizes that the immediate problem is Russia, but the long-term challenge is China. So that awareness is there, and many even tell us China cannot become stronger than what they are already. And we keep telling these countries that there has to be transatlantic cooperation, not competition, when it comes to handling China. Now, Europe cannot expect that US alone will be able to contain China. It's not possible. Now you need all the democratic, free, liberal countries to come together. And we also tell those countries, please don't look at us only from the perspective of a victim of communism. If you can look at us as partners to bring about positive change inside Tibet or inside China, you need both internal and external forces. And we are the internal forces, whether it's the Tibetans or the Uyghurs or the Mongols or the Hong Kongers, or if you want to include the Taiwanese also, we are all facing the same opponent. And right now, the whole international scenario is so fluid as we speak. Also, there are so many things changing. We are also watching which direction China is going, where it's leading, and what has been happening over the last few months. How many countries China have been able to reach out. So what kind of global role they are trying to play, despite not reducing their aggressiveness in the areas they feel that they should be talking about. So that is, I think we still need to study the situation more. And then I think political support from India, I already covered that a little bit. In the parliament, unfortunately, the Indian parliamentary system also does not allow for too many experts on foreign affairs. Many politicians are very busy with their domestic affairs, constituency affairs, and then parliament's getting washed out. But our parliamentarians in Dharamsala, whenever there is a session here, the speaker, deputy speaker, and the members of Tibetan parliament, they reach out to Indian parliamentarians. I myself used to reach out to them when I was the director of Tibetan Parliamentary and Policy Research Center. I still have some good friends, and but I deal more with the administration these days. So when we find a little more time, we'll definitely reach out to more politicians. But we do know that we have good sympathy and support from all the members. There are hardly any who are against the Tibetan cause.
Last bunch of questions.
Sir,
Yes.
I understand there's a gradual movement of the Tibetan diaspora out of India to the US and parts further west. How does that impact your position here?
This is sorry. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Hi, I'm Rupam from Reuters. I just had a quick question. When you spoke about the discussions about, in terms of negotiations and talks with China, if you could elaborate a little more. And is there a possibility that, your government in exile could be looking for a mediator nation to help facilitate these talks? Thank you.
Your Excellency, recently there was an incident involving His Holiness and a young boy, which I think unnecessarily drew so much controversy. So, what do you have to say about that, Your Excellency?
My name is Narayanan from German television. The West is very sensitive to Russia's invasion to Ukraine, but West was not so sensitive to China's invasion to Tibet 50 years ago, or 1950s. So do you think that this present situation, the global scenario, is making any difference vis-a-vis the perspective of West towards Tibet? That's the first part. Second part, I would like to know a little more about what kind of negotiation you are doing with China.
Okay. Tibetans have been moving from the compact communities for now almost 20, 30 years. So when we came in, of course, we knew about this problem even before, but more specifically about the actual problems after I took over as the Sikong. We found two major challenges. One was the dispersing compact Tibetan communities. We consider the compact Tibetan communities very important for our existence and sustainability. Over the last 63 years, we managed to preserve our language, our culture, our religion, our way of life through these compact communities. So the dispersing Tibetan community, particularly young Tibetans who can give birth to children, who can have productive labor, they are moving out because now they got education and we are not able to provide them with jobs in the rural Tibetan settlements. And the other challenge we found was that in the last 30, 40 years, we had more than 2,000 families who came from Tibet and who don't have anything to call their own. And these two challenges we decided to combine together and turn it into an opportunity by providing housing to the Tibetans who came from Tibet in the last 30, 40 years and moving them into the larger clusters to make sure that the compact communities survive into the future. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity. And as I said before also, now we look at how to turn every challenge into an opportunity. And one of the reasons that we have started this voluntary Tibet advocacy group, a platform for every single Tibetan to join Tibet advocacy work internationally, is happening only because there are more Tibetans now. There are Tibetans in more than 25 different countries, and they have become citizens there. They speak the language, whether it's German, Spanish, French, whatever. And if they understand a little more about the political system and the situation inside Tibet, they could be very effective lobbyists. So these are the opportunities that we managed to turn from challenges. And then on the negotiation, as I said, I don't want to talk too much because it's too early. There's nothing that I can speak specifically about. And when things happen, I'm sure this will also be made available to the media. But from the Chinese perspective, yes, they don't appreciate mediator. They don't appreciate third party. They always say Tibet is a domestic issue. So we'll have to look at different perspectives when it comes to that. And I'll take the third question last. Current situation, whether that helps Tibet or not. Right now, it's very difficult to say. We are watching all this situation. We are watching geostrategic, whatever is there in the whole region, whatever is happening. Every single day, I spent a few hours watching news, surfing channels, reading news, understanding what is happening. So we are still watching. It's very, when the whole world is going the other way around, we don't want to go another way. So we'll have to find out what is a good balance under the current prevailing or evolving dynamism of international politics. And then His Holiness and the young boy, this has now become a very emotional question. And I had liked to ask this question as to who is the real victim in this story. Some say the boy, the family, but I find that the boy is fine. He had spoken well after the event. The mother was fine. The mother had spoken well after the event. All the 120 students who were there in that event had no complaints whatsoever. I looked through all the interviews by the Tibetan media after the event was over. So at that time, there was nothing there. And it was already in the public media, in the public domain. And then now, the fact of the matter is, His Holiness is now 87 years old. He's going to be 88. Because of his age, he needs to be supported from both sides. And you want to accuse an 88-year-old man with this kind of a libel? And His Holiness has always lived in the sanctity of an oath-bound Buddhist monk, including celibacy. And his years of spiritual practice has him gone beyond sensorial pleasures. He has always been preaching the sensorial pleasures of eye, nose, mouth, body. All these are very, very temporary. So you need to go deeper to redeem yourself from this samsara. And someone who preaches that do you think will be influenced by a physical touch? He is beyond all that. And then the personal integrity of His Holiness was never ever in question in the last 87 years. So how can people pass a judgment on one incident, and that too not knowing the full sequence of the event? And he lives an unblemished life, preaching and practicing compassion, nonviolence, and oneness of humanity. All his life. However, the recent incident involving His Holiness Dalai Lama and the young boy, in full public view, it didn't happen in some corner or some room or some, undescriptive place. And this was perceived and interpreted differently. I don't blame them. People might have their opinion. They saw it that way because the clip was tailored for that. The clip was tailored for that. And His Holiness was then now being labeled all kinds of names. Maybe for the people who are giving these names, it's an individual case, an individual perception. But His Holiness for us is the reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Lord of compassion. And His compassion and His love extends beyond all this. And that really hurts us. Please understand this. We are hurt by the insinuations. Now, if I have to share you how His Holiness has been engaging with people all through his life. Look at all the kind of pictures. His Holiness and Desmond Tutu, when Tutu was here, I was there. They are playing with each other like small children. Look at the picture with His Holiness with his pout and Tutu on the other side. That also, then you could say that, oh, His Holiness may have sexual whatever thing for Tutu. And then if His Holiness hugs a old lady also, does that imply that thing? Not at all. So let me take a little bit of time because this is a serious issue for us. And whenever you have seen His Holiness meeting with political leaders, I've heard of His Holiness holding ears of presidents and then touching foreheads. And that's the highest honor from a Buddhist perspective, for a High Lama to touch forehead with each other. And His Holiness is very unique in that sense. And that is why he is so famous. But what happened on that day was a little gross for some people. And so holding hands, nose rubbing, the Maori style. His Holiness is very happy doing that because since he was in New Zealand many years ago and rubbed nose, and he rubs noses with many of his guests. And I've been witness to many of these because now I was in Dharamsala for more than 35 years. Or 25 years. 25 years. So I know how these things happen. Then cuddling, sometimes holding your nose. So all these are part of His Holiness antics that His Holiness does. And then forehead to forehead greeting. Genuine manifestation of His Holiness compassion for all human beings, irrespective of their status in the society. And His Holiness was also used to play pranks or engage in jovial interactions to amuse the gathering. Now, fact of the matter, on that day was this program was held in a public place, the Chuglakang, just opposite to the residence of His Holiness the Dalai Lama on 28th of February. There were more than 120 college-going students, part of this M3M delegation, who asked to seek his audience. And it was a public event. that was covered by the media. And all these happened publicly, not everywhere else or anywhere else. And it was the same boy who we are envious because he got this opportunity to welcome His Holiness, hug His Holiness, all those blessings he got, but others perceive it differently. And it was the same boy, when His Holiness arrived, he broke the coconut to welcome His Holiness. Auspicious welcome. And then 2 members of the M3M delegation spoke at that event. Then His Holiness spoke at length about the topic. And the seriousness of that topic, nobody talks, because that doesn't benefit anybody. That does not increase the TRP. And then after His Holiness spoke, it was question answer session. 3 elders asked the question. Then the 4th one was this young boy again. And if you see the video, he was asking His Holiness, can I ask one question? Can I hug you? His Holiness didn't even understand that, because His Holiness has little impairment in the left ear. So the translator was explaining to His Holiness that this boy wants to hug you. And His Holiness didn't hear well from the left. So on the right hand, another personal secretary of His Holiness informed His Holiness, this boy wants to hug you. Then His Holiness said, okay, come. It's not like His Holiness went on the boy and jumped on him. It's totally different, And the boy's mother was sitting on the right-hand side, just next to Professor Samdor Rinpoche. And the mother was also asking the boy to come up. And just as we are Asians, we know how grandfatherly affection can be. But this went a little beyond. So all these happened, and then His Holiness gave an innocent, grandfatherly, affectionate demeanor and greeted the boy. That was followed by His Holiness' jovial prank about the tongue. Okay? And that was meant to be, from my perspective, that was meant to be amusement for others. And all this happened in the presence of the family, of the mother. Now, after that, the videos that you don't see, because it was tailored, after that, again, His Holiness embraced the boy. Both embraced each other. Then His Holiness advised this boy, we are same human brothers and sisters. Now, you should look at those good human beings who create peace and happiness, and should not follow human beings who always kill other people. You should not look at those people. If you see the video, all those are there. If you want the full coverage, we'll try to make it available to you from top to bottom. Watch the whole thing. And then after the event, Radio Free Asia, Voice of Tibet, they interviewed many of the participants. And one of that was the boy, the same boy. And the boy said after the event that it was amazing. This is boy's words. The video is also there. It was amazing meeting with His Holiness. And I think it's a really great experience meeting somebody with so high positive energy. It's a really nice feeling meeting him, and you get a lot of that positive energy. It's not just like that, but once you get the positive energy, I think you are happier, and it's a better thing to smile a lot more. It's really a good experience. This is just one of the transcription. There is another transcription with Radio Free Asia, who had also interviewed the same boy. Now, speaking to Voice of Tibet, again, the mother of that boy, immediately after the event, the mother said, since we are looking at seeking blessings from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and today we got this opportunity, especially my family was there with me. All the students who graduated from IM Power Academy of Skills were also present. We are totally blessed to get this blessing from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He came and addressed in person and taught about peace that the world needs and how everyone needs to feel together like brothers and sisters. I absolutely cannot express how I feel getting blessed by him. Thank you. That is the boy's mother. Now, who's the victim? The mother is not a victim. The boy is not a victim. They are not complaining. The victim here is His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Now, why is this happening? I have two conclusions to this. One, however, through our investigation and as per prima facie evidence, we found that the initial instigators are pro-Chinese sources. Now, you are all journalists. Please find out how this resurfaced again and who is trying to use that. Chinese sources that itself explains the motivation behind making this video clip viral. It needs no explanation as to who would gain from maligning the image, reputation, and legacy of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Considering the scale and extent of the orchestrated smear campaign, the political angle of this incident cannot be ignored. Then, for the general public who considers or who feels this is disturbing, we would appreciate if you could watch and listen to the full video of the event to get a holistic understanding of the whole program, including His Holiness' speech. We are sure you will be able to differentiate between lust and love. That is where we fail. So, and the unfairness of defaming one of the most respected and liked global icons of peace. And that narrows the scope of due diligence and fair judgment from people who are making a judgment on this.
Before I invite Dr. Awad to propose a vote of thanks, I want to disclose the Chinese embassy worked very hard to dissuade the FCC from inviting His Excellency to come and talk to the global media. I politely told them that India is a free country and FCC is a platform which is offered to people, and if the Chinese embassy has anything to say, they are most welcome to come and talk to us. Excellency, we wish to make you an honorary member of the club in appreciation of the fact that you have taken time to come to us.
Hello. Excuse me.
Dr. Awad.
I always thank the Chinese government for being our publicity agent. Since she already received some
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to the FCC to join us in this event. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency Senpa Cheese Ring for enlightening us with this historical background of the Tibetan history, politically, religiously, and civilizational way of looking at the Tibet from different angles. And we thank also for all the friends who have helped in making this event taking place. We had the opportunity and the privilege of having His Holiness the Dalai Lama also in our club during long years ago when I'm still in India. So we had the privilege of having most of the time the Tibetan people representing in this club. And we welcome you again as an honorary member to our club. I would like to thank our president also of the FCC for taking this courage of having such a distinguished guest. And the Foreign Correspondent Club of South Asia, for your knowledge, is the oldest club in Asia. It's 1958 established. We have 1,000 plus members, foreign journalists, plus Indian journalists, corporate diplomats, and also some of our colleagues who are willing to contribute to the free media and to the club welfare. So we welcome you all as a member. We welcome all the colleagues who wanted to join and make yourself free to attend our club. And once again, I thank you and I thank all of you who have been present here to make this a successful event. Thank you very much. Thank you.